Okay, we're rolling. Excellent. Well, welcome, Bruce Morton. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Johnny. Good to be here.
Excellent stuff. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to looking at some of the concepts that you discuss in your book, Redesigning the Way Work Works, and specifically addressing some of these things through the lens of how it applies to outcome-based work. So I'm really looking forward to that. Before we get into it, what would be really great is if you could just give a quick introduction on what you do now, the kind of path you took there to get there. Sorry, I know you've got a huge wealth of experience in the sector, but also, and possibly more importantly, why you do what you do.
Right, okay, that's a good start. Yeah, so, this is my 41st year in the industry. So I started in 1979. And like everybody, certainly then, I fell into it. You don't, none of the careers officers at school were saying, getting to recruit my lad. People didn't understand what it was, but interesting. So it was when I was 12 years old, I started working part-time at the local butchers, got into that, left school at 16, did an apprenticeship as a butcher with the local family butcher, loved it. And then I got to 21 and I broke my back.
Wow.
And that meant I couldn't, I could no longer lift sides of beef. So I thought, okay, I've got to change my direction here. And I thought, okay, I'll better go and find myself a job. So I went to a number of employment agencies, as they were called back in the day. And it was really interesting. So as soon as I said, oh yeah, what are you doing now? As soon as I said I'm a butcher, I may as well have been there with the striped apron and a straw bow tie. But yeah, thanks. Don't call us, we'll call you. And after having done that like half a dozen times, I thought, perhaps I should do that. So I then decided to reapproach these organizations, said, hey, I'm going to come and work for you. And my third conversation I had, a guy's like, yeah, okay, why not? The following Monday I started, walked in a room, he gave me 3 yellow pages. I wanted to start a driving division. Call these companies, these transport companies, see if they need any drivers, and then we'll give you a database, phone some drivers up. And that's how we're in the industry. Anyway, 41 years ago. And I've loved it ever since. It's been very kind to me, allowed me to literally live and work all over the world. And so right now, I'm head of strategy for Allegis Global Solutions, which means different things on different days, of course. But in a nutshell, it means that I spend half my time working with our clients to help them see around the corner, look into the future, and then the other half of the time actually making sure that we're building the right solutions to actually deliver on that promise. You can tell by my accent, I'm originally from the UK, spent a number of years in Asia, but I've been in Connecticut now, just about an hour outside New York for the last 10 years.
That's such an interesting story. And I think, when what you were talking about there with that major change when you broke your back, that must have just changed everything. And I think the resilience and the resourcefulness that you have to demonstrate in those type of situations where just everything changes, in some ways that's very applicable to what the recruitment industry should really be all about, in the sense that it's about solving problems of how do I apply my skills, how do I earn a living, what's my path in life. So in some ways that must have been a very powerful lesson for kind of what you've gone on to do.
Yeah, and hey, I'm incredibly fortunate that one, I was able to walk again because I was paralyzed for just over a year, waist down.
Wow.
And I live a perfectly normal life. People would never know what happened. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But it does give you a different view on life. I tend to be the eternal optimist because I'm just glad to get up every morning and get out of bed. So I think it helps change your personality. And I think one thing that you need in our industry is resilience and a very sunny outlook. Right? It's not all flowers and roses every day. You have to take the rough with the smooth. And I think that having spent the first, I guess, half of my career in this industry predominantly in sales roles, you get to learn that celebrating success very, very well and moving on from less successful things pretty quickly. So yeah, I think it is about resilience.
Yeah, and it's something that everybody's having to look at the moment with the whole COVID situation, in terms of people's careers being derailed, their companies being derailed, things just changing completely outside their control. So I think, yeah, that's a really interesting point. Just in terms of your general sort of enthusiasm for this industry and the whole, you know, everything to do with work, how do you kind of maintain those levels of enthusiasm?
Yeah, I think that, again, I think we're all of us that are in the industry, I think we're fortunate that the industry does change incredibly quickly. Now, fundamentally, it's about putting people to work. That hasn't changed, right? But the way you do that and the way you think about work itself, which is really what the inspiration was for me to write the book, that has changed so dramatically in the last few years. And hey, I didn't know when I wrote the book in 2019 what was going to happen in 2020. But it's been really fascinating to see some of those things, those changes that I thought were going to take 5 years or more to come to reality. It's sort of happened in 2020. You know, we're living in what I think historians will call in the future one of the biggest social experiments the world has ever seen, predominantly around the work, the way that people get work done differently. You know, like there's the obvious things, like did we all realize we could work from home? That was always a well discussed debate. People used to like, oh, on Friday I'll work from home, and people used to use the inverted bracket commas, you know, they said work from home, because people didn't really believe people were necessarily. And I think one thing, many things have been proved, but one thing is people want to work and they want to do their very best work. It doesn't matter whether they're sat at home or sat in an office. So I think the level of trust has been phenomenal, the way that's grown. And coming to your point about the outcome as a service, you know, and organizations looking more about outcome, it's sort of the only way you can manage people when they're not sat across the office. You know, you can't measure people on input anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I think I totally agree that, and this is what interests me, is the whole thing is so fascinating. The changes, you know, 60 years ago, it was job for life. You know, it wasn't that long ago that the concept of the gig economy was very radical. People saw it as quite radical, and remote working was you know, viewed in a similar way. And the catalyst of COVID has just completely accelerated so many things and changed so many things. I was chatting to a friend of mine who's a pilot, and I was astonished when he was talking about the percentage of the airline that he flies for profit that is made from just basically flights between effectively London and New York, business flights from London and New York. It's a large percentage of the overall business revenue, and particularly the profitability. And that sort of stuff is probably going to change, quite possibly going to change forever. Just when you look at things like travel, but from a work perspective, that has really massively changed. And I'm sure, yeah, as you said, one of the things I'd like to kind of round up with is looking at all the things we talk about and trying to work out how you might update your book if you were going to rewrite it right now, or you never know, you might need to update it. But going back to what you said about trust, I think that's a really interesting point, because that's one of the factors that people have always struggled with the gig economy. So if you look at the gig economy and how that relates to enterprise organizations trying to make use of gig type transactions, trust's a massive issue. Trust an issue for smaller companies as well. But when you look at outcome-based scenario, you know, it really is, you get what you pay, you're getting something that you've paid for. And that's a totally different type of transaction. So I think it's very interesting. But it's fundamentally a different attitude to work that, in my opinion, starts right at the beginning of the process of how do you define the work, and that comes on to some of the things you talk about in your book around work design, etc. Before we come on to that in a bit more detail, just if you look at the growth and the prevalence of outcome-based work delivery that you're seeing within Allegis Global Solutions, what are you seeing in terms of the growth of services-based outsourced services, statement of work, etc.?
Yeah, it's been incredible. I think a few things. Firstly, the deals that we had in progress in pipeline 2020 when the whole COVID hit, we thought that all of those would be pushed off and delayed. Every single one of them, the call was, how quickly can you do this? So, and because those CPOs, those procurement officers or head of category management for labor, they were being asked by their boss, how are we getting work done? Who are these people? Are they safe? Do you know who they are? What contract we have them? All of a sudden, it became a boardroom item. So rather than the head of procurement trying to convince their colleagues that, hey, getting our arms around the services spend is a good thing, it became a necessity. So it's expedited the growth of that. And if you look at any stats from staffing industry analysts or Everest, any of those guys and girls will tell you that, compared to staff or contingent workforce, services is on an exponential growth pattern right now. And one of the reasons for that is more and more organizations are getting the ability, and they're getting better at wrapping up pieces of work, putting a price label on and sending them out. But it is a skill set, more than ever, with your organizations. That's what, I guess it's one of the massive values of the platform is that it allows companies to do that. Because most of these managers, it wasn't a skill set that they had until recently. It wasn't one they needed. If you look back in time when, everybody wanted to study management and all these management books came out, millions of them. And then probably 20, 25 years ago, somebody said, it's not about management, it's about leadership. Oh, okay, let's go all those books. There's lots of books on leadership. It's not about managing from the back, lead from the front. But all of that, the commonality was about managing or leading people. Today, we're in a world where it's about leading the work. As my very good friend, John Boudreau's book, Lead the Work, will tell you. So that's a new skill set for a manager. So now you're a business head. It isn't just about what type of people do I need to hire, what skill sets. It's what is the best way of getting this work done? Do I bundle it up, put it out there? What should I keep in-house? What piece of work do I care who does it compared to a piece of work I don't care who does it? If you want a new logo for a new project and you want, $25, you'll get that done. That could be a 14-year-old lad in Vietnam. It doesn't matter, right? It's other piece of work. You absolutely need to know who's getting that work done and how it's getting done. So that's given us that whole new dimension. But all of it added up means that organizations are outsourcing pieces of work more and more than they ever have before. Now, if you're a historian of our industry, like I am, I guess, after all these years, is when we go back to when that happened in IT, and organizations started outsourcing the upkeep and the servicing of their laptops, right, and their PCs and the laptops. Our industry, the staffing industry, missed a trick at the time. Going back, it's always like, it's easier in hindsight, but if we'd have seen that coming, we'd be like, hang on a minute, we have all the people that can do that work.
Yeah.
But why don't we provide that service? But the staffing industry didn't, because the staffing industry put itself in a box of, no, we attract and hire talent. We don't deliver outcomes. So that left the window open for all of these massive IT outsourcing organizations and the big four and everybody else, professional services, to come and own that space, BPO and everything else. And where do all of those organizations go for the workers? The staffing companies.
Yeah. So
the staffing industry remained for a long, long time, towards the bottom of that ladder, let's say, to be polite. What's happening now, to answer your question finally, about one of the trends we're seeing, certainly at Allegis, is, in our IT staffing firms, more than half the work we do now is based on services, as opposed to people.
Yeah.
But we started seeing that at the top end, but the latest, I guess, or the newest data we're seeing and trends are that's going all the way down to light industrial. So, at warehouse level, at distribution level, organizations, instead of saying, oh, hi, I need 10 forklift drivers and 5 pickers and packers to start Monday, they say, no, I want to pay you 50 cents to move that box from there to there. How you do it, that's your problem. Because I can then now budget in my business far more accurately because I'm not taking the risk of how many people it takes to do a job. That's what you should be doing. So that means more of that risk, if you like, or more of the gamble on and the understanding of how many people you need to get something done is now sitting in our industry, which currently is called staffing, moving into services. And I think that the majority of what we do will look like that over the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think, when you're talking about the focus on what needs to be done, that kind of comes back to the shifting balance between work and workers, and where do you start with that whole scenario? And the idea of it being a skill to be able to write a requirement and work out what you need to get done. I mean, traditionally, if I go back to my job board days, companies and even recruitment companies to a certain extent are not very good at writing job specs. So writing a requirement is a different skill, but it's something that people are having to get better at. And ultimately, it's a very pragmatic way to do business. As you say, it's eminently scalable. If you can say, well, I know a box is going to cost me 50 cents to move from there to there, and therefore you're just tying it into all of your other costs, you can just get a far more accurate measure than saying, I'm going to hire someone on a time and materials basis and someone's going to manage them and stuff will get done, hopefully, when it gets done. But I do think it's very much kind of going back to what you were saying about the beginning process as to what's the best way to get this done? What's the best way to resource this objective? That is one of the most important things as far as I'm concerned, because it's very much horses for courses. I always say this, in the right scenario, it's going to be a permanent employee. There's always going to be the use case for a contractor or a temp. And by the same token, outsourcing a piece of work and getting it done on a deliverables basis. So you mentioned about how within Allegis things are changing in terms of how you're delivering the services. What do you see within the market generally around how MSPs are adapting to this world of services procurement? Because in some ways you could say services procurement is different to contingent workforce, for example. It's it's different to HR, and there's some separation in a lot of organizations. How do you see that playing out in the industry at the moment?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we were, I guess, smart or lucky or both, but we were one of the MSPs that were first out the gate to get into services. So we've got a bit of space between us and our competitors because we were just first out the gate 9-10 years ago. But when that first started, we were guilty as anybody else, thinking that it was an extension of the MSP. Because you've got your relationship in procurement, you've got an established MSP, you've got your compliance and risk, and you're running a really robust process, and you're giving visibility of those workers to that organization. And then what we started seeing, and it's the classic, squeezing the balloon. People are like, oh, good, this is really good. Now we've really shone the light on that contingent workforce. It's starting to shrink. That's because, no, hang on a minute, it's going somewhere else. And it was going into, what was called SOW at the time, statement of work. Because managers, I passionately believe managers don't try and hack the system. They just want to get work done, and they find the path of least resistance. And if an organization puts in a 12-month tenure limit, and that project's taking 2 years, I'm not going to hire a contractor. I only go to the market because I can bundle it under a statement of work, and then I can keep those individuals for as long as I want. So this concept of tenure limit actually caused this behavior to grow statement of work. And the bizarre thing about that is the reason that tenure limits grew so rapidly is because of co-employment.
Yeah.
Any lawyer worth their salt will tell you tenure limit has nothing to do with co-employment. It's just that an organization got fined many, many years ago and people joined the dots on the two. And there's far other reasons, but let's not get into that conversation on this call.
That's probably the lowest common denominator when it comes to co-employment, isn't it? It's like there's probably all sorts of other things that are going wrong, but at the worst case scenario, so at the very basic level, some companies will go, that contractor's been there for 10 years and they're sitting at a desk using a work computer, coming to the Christmas party and managing a team of 10.
But anyway, that started happening. We started seeing this growth, and that's now, we would, as a intelligent estimate, you can look at any organization, understand how much they're spending on contractors, and multiply that by a factor of 5. That's what they're spending on services. It's a general statement, but I've heard many times it's accurate, right? So that's how that industry started. So coming back to your question about how we've evolved and how we see that now, what we realized pretty quickly all those years ago is that this isn't recruitment, this isn't staffing, right? This is procurement, and you have to have procurement expertise and procurement experts to run the category of labor or professional services, where you want to define it. And if there's a human involved, who runs that category? So we, I guess, smartly we went and hired a few of our clients that were heads of procurement and brought them in, and they're still with us and now leading that company, the strategy of it to an extent. So we now look far more like a procurement outsourced labor function than an MSP that's saying, hey, we can manage that spend for you as well. I think the other interesting thing that's happening that will be debated for many, many more years is, should it be supplier funded or client funded? Now, because the MSP, when that was created all those years ago, supplier funded, more fool us. We created this monster of supplier funded, right? So whenever any of us, me or any of our competitors, try and get any cash to do anything out of a procurement department, they're going to be like, no, I don't have money. Your program supplier funded, right? So it's a monster we created that we have to live with. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying it's a bad or good thing. It's just the way the industry is. So naturally, MSP providers, that when they started getting into services, they say, oh, let's just take the same approach. It's different though, because some of these services contracts getting to many, many millions of dollars. Why would a big four company want to pay, a percentage point of all of that spend? Where's the value in it for them? So that's what the industry is going through right now, trying to decide in a way, should this be supplier? Should it be client funded? Is it a hybrid of both? Is there some of this should be, invoiced on activities, processing, with SOWs versus spend? There's all of that. But across the biggest dilemma that our industry has in MSP and services is one of the major reasons organizations bring us in is to help them save costs.
Yeah. So
if our model, the way we get paid, is predicated on how much you spend, but we're in there trying to reduce that, it's just a real weird dichotomy. So I don't know where that's going to end up, Johnny. Crystal ball time, but I do think that the next few years there will be more of a standard way of how organizations think about this than there is now. Right now, it's still being the direction is being persuaded by the MSP model. I don't think that'll be the fact in a few years. Yeah,
there's a lot of interesting points there. I think with picking up on that last one around the way that it's funded and the kind of spend models, I mean, the market's still fairly embryonic as far as we're concerned. It's got a massive amount of growth to do. The existing problem is already huge with people with spend that they need to get their arms around, and the growth in needing to address this problem, as you say, is increasing because of various factors. And ultimately, what it's going to come down to really in the future, as far as we believe, is it's about being able to measure return on investment, what people are actually getting for their money, and increasing the value that they're getting from their services. I mean, some of the more future-looking stuff that we're doing with our SPX algorithm, which is supplier performance management, that is really about addressing that longer-term problem, where you need to understand, what am I spending? Who am I spending it with? What are the projects? Are the suppliers on time, on budget? Are they scope creeping? But ultimately, are they doing a good job? And what am I getting for my money? And that's the key question within services procurement that most CPOs at the moment are not in a position to be able to answer, which, in some ways you look at it and think that's crazy, bearing in mind that it's, some people estimate it to be $1 trillion plus spend globally per year.
I always use the analogy, Johnny, and if you have a temp secretary come and sit in on reception for a few days back in the day when they used to come and sit on reception, you'll have that temp for a few days, then you'll get 5 feedback forms from the agency about how well they did. You spend millions and millions of dollars with a massive organization, and who's actually capturing whether they did a good job or not? I mean, it's the ultimate irony.
What do you think in terms of what's driving this growth in outcome-based services? What do you feel is driving it from a global basis? I think there are a couple of things that I'd be interested to come on to briefly that are really specifically driving it in the short term in the UK. Right, but globally, obviously, COVID's having an effect where, as I see it, everybody's just looking at their spend and going, that 100 million we spent on consulting, what do we get for it? Was it well spent? If you want to do any consulting, it's got to go through the CFO, anything, So what do you think, outside of the COVID situation, are there other factors that you see driving this globally?
Yeah, I think as organizations get more and more visibility, and some of that comes through, an ERP system they have, albeit they don't get all the information they need, they're actually starting to get some analytics. And I think the old game used to be, how much did you spend last year with consultants? Let's use that, 50 million. Okay, you need to reduce that to 45 million this year because we're cutting back on spending. Definition of madness. The question should be, from that 50 million, what did that add to our business? Oh, well, actually, the ROI was 80 million. Okay, I don't want you spending 50 million this year. I want you spending 60.
Yeah.
But you can only have those conversations if you've got the data, exactly the point you were making. What do you think you bought? What did you actually buy? And was that delivered? So I think that's one, the visibility and data help people understand this better, and they start looking at total cost of ownership and ROI. That's just a natural progression. The COVID impact on that is organizations have realized that they've got to be far more nimble and agile for whatever the next thing is. I know as we're recording this, we've got a few days of 2020 left, but hopefully we're done. The swarm of locusts might come past me in a minute saying that, but hopefully we're done. But, what is the next thing? The supply chain has been completely disrupted. Here in the US, there's a whole US-China thing. So people talk about that a lot. What does the new supply chain look like? So the ultimate way to be nimble and agile is have a fewer and fewer employees and outsource more and more. It just is, whether that's bringing in contractors or pure outsourcing. So that's the economic impact, if you like, of organizations having to run very, very lean and looking at a spreadsheet and saying, what's the minimum we can be? What is the core of who we are? What do we want to be known for? What's our IP? Everything outside of that, can it be automated? Firstly, if it can't, can it be outsourced? So there's that approach going on. And I think then emotionally, on top of all of that, all of us have been through an awful year in 2020. And those folks that have laid people off, as the business is coming back, which it is, speed of light, the business is coming back. But are people really going to rush out and hire employees? It still hurts. It still hurts from them hiring that, to let their friends go a few months ago. So there'll be a natural, can we go temp to perm loop, for example? Let's just start off that way, just in case something happens during that 3 or 6 month period. Or even better, can I just get somebody else to do this? So, a lot there, but, as the old saying goes, it's sort of a perfect storm of all those things coming together.
Yeah, I think in the UK, it's, potentially even more so in this space, in the sense that you've got Brexit. We, as you say, at the point of recording, we could still be heading for a no-deal Brexit. So whatever impact that will have remains to be seen. But ultimately, this is happening on the 1st of January. Always good to pick a bank holiday for these things, but or a weekend. But one of the effects of that is that's going to drive outsourcing, because it's going to end the free movement of people across Europe into the UK. So instead of being able to hire someone from outside the UK on a contract basis, you can hire them via an outsourced service provider who will employ them on a tier 2 visa, for example. So there's all this great talent that businesses in the UK want access to. And in my opinion, that is going to really drive the outsourcing picture. But on top of that, we've also got you mentioned co-employment. In the UK, we have legislation called IR35, which is all around the same thing, which is basically disguised employment. Are they self-employed or employed? Taxation of that. UK government are really hot on it, and this is rolling out to the private sector in the UK in April, and that is going to drive the need for alternatives. It's not necessarily going to mean everyone says, well, we have to just do everything one set way. Not everyone's not going to go perm. Everyone's not necessarily going to be contracting. Not necessarily going to be everything via outsourcing. But companies need different strings to their bow, and I think it's going to force the rapid increase in maturity in the UK compared to the rest of the world. So the Brexit driver plus the IR35 driver, I think, will mean that the UK is very much at the forefront of having to deal with this. But as you said, globally, we're seeing these impacts around, how supply chains are affected by economic factors, but also just adaptability. Companies need to be more and more adaptable. Innovation's happening faster. Change happens faster. What's going to be the next thing after this? someone switches off the internet. I don't know,
Yeah.
a computer virus instead, a computer coronavirus. But yeah, I think that diversity of supply chain, access to nimble suppliers, but it also ties into how people work. And it kind of ties into one of the things that your book talks about, which is how people are perhaps even more attached to their specific craft than they are to their employer. In the sense that, people want to work, people need to earn money. They want to do something useful with their life, and they want to do something that they're good at, and they want to do something that they enjoy. And in an ultimate kind of panacea, you'd have all of those things. How do you see this playing out against that backdrop of the personal attitude of people? For example, with things like the recognition of completing a task versus being in a job and working on an hourly basis, for example.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that desire, Talentsumers, I call them, people consume work. So human beings now, and have done for a number of years now, but they act as consumers of work. Back in the day, when my father was at work, you were a different person when you went in the office. You left your personality at the factory gate, as they'd say, and then you went in, you became a drone for 8 hours, you came back and, hey, I'm back again, it's me. And you had, I remember when I was doing sales recruitment back in the day, we had a Thomas International psychometric test that would analyze who somebody is, what their personality is, and what their work mask is. Literally, that's how we measure people. Oh yeah, it's a bit of a this, but he'll be really good in the workplace because he shows you different traits. That's all disappeared. And a lot of that was around the time of Gen Y, and everybody thought it was a Gen Y thing. It wasn't. It's just a natural maturation of how people think about work. And one of the biggest causes of it is we had the concept of work-life integration because somebody invented the smartphone that allowed us to work on the way to work and on the way back from work, and then it just became our thing, right? As I always say to people, you try and get up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom, and not look at your phone. It's almost impossible. So because now that's just what we do, therefore it means we're more likely to behave like the person we are, as opposed to being something else for that very, very defined time.
Right.
So what that's created is people's ability to say, okay, if that's who I do, that's what I'm all about. That's a big part of me, right? So it's got to be more sincere, and therefore it's more about my craft than what it says above the door. To go back to my father's generation, if somebody said to him, what do you do for a living? He'd name the company first.
Yeah.
And they say, no, but what do you do for them? And then you might finally get that out of them. Now you ask somebody what they do, and they say, I'm an app developer. IBM are enjoying my company right now. Doesn't mean they're disloyal. It just means they're more loyal to the craft. And I think all the negativity around Gen Y and millennial, all these people aren't loyal. Yes, they are. It's just something different. So that means as an organization, if they're your employees, you need to understand that. And what people are looking for, many other things, but to hone in on your point, everybody wants to have a start, middle, and finish of something. So the struggle that some companies are having now that don't fully get this is they're not projectizing the work. Got to projectize the work so that there's an outcome. That might be daily, it might be weekly, it might be every 3 months. But somehow you need to build in, you've got to get, if it's a menial job that's the same every day, then the robot should be doing it. Stop having your human beings doing jobs of robots, right? But all the rest of it, you've got to projectize it. And that means breaking down silos. So finance people don't just work with finance, right? They jump into a project for a few months with some BD folks, some ops folks, some product development folks. They create a piece of work and then move on to the next thing. So that's the biggest impact in my mind that we're seeing from an individual's desire right now. And so we've got the companies wanting to get into the outcome as a service, and we've got individuals as well. And those two things together are what are expediting the change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's almost, in a way, you could kind of say it's almost kind of full circle back to when most people worked for themselves, but they were skilled tradespeople or craftsmen, for example.
100%. I remember as a kid going to my grandmother's, sitting at the kitchen table, and she'd be there making matchboxes. And she got paid per matchbox. She didn't get paid by the hour. Yeah. She got paid on the outcome. As you said, before that, it was, the way work was invented when, we'd all go in the fields and be cutting corn for ourselves. Somebody said, hang on a minute, why don't you guys cut the corn, you guys do something else? And we created what's now called an org chart, right?
So if we're starting with what needs to be done rather than starting with who do we need, I think that's a really interesting concept, and I think it's a very important thing when people are looking at outsourcing, because what I don't believe you can do is approach outsourcing and go, well, we've got 10 people doing that at the moment, therefore we need to it's the wrong approach. It's a question of what do you need to get done rather than who's doing it or who is going to do it, because theoretically it shouldn't matter if you're pricing up a piece of work, an objective, and a company's going to get that done for you and they're going to be measured on delivery of that and paid on delivery, then to a certain extent you shouldn't really worry about who's doing it or how it's actually being done.
Yeah, and how much is being automated. It doesn't matter whether it's a robot doing it or an individual, right? You're just paying for the outcome.
And so one of the things you talk about in your book, which I love, this concept of work design architect, and this is, I think, it's something that's extremely strategic, because as I said, getting work delivered to outcomes is an incredibly pragmatic way of doing things. There's less margin for error, I would argue, in that method of getting a piece of work done than employing some people on a time and materials basis, because it's forcing you to have clear objectives. It's forcing you to have clear timelines. And I think we've all seen it. If anyone's worked in a large organization has seen teams and management structures that are inefficient, and there's a lack of direction and there's lack of clear objectives. So tell me a little bit more about your kind of concept around this work design architect type role.
Yeah, and I think the need for it, let me start there and I'll talk about the role itself, is where this has got to. And I think our industry, the staffing industry, have some blame in a way in this, the way it's got to. Because many years ago, you'd have a one-page job description and a one-page person description, and that would create your rec that you go out to market with. And over the time period, because of automation and computers, and because of the speed of contingent, the way you need to fill contingent jobs, all the companies are sending you predominantly is just the description of the person. But what are they going to do? Well, they're a Java developer. What do you think they're going to do? Oh, okay, fine. So we as an industry sort of accepted that all we just needed a description of what skills do you need, how much experience, and we'll go and do a match on that. So the concept of that work actually started disappearing.
Yeah.
Now what we're seeing is a complete reversal of that. In my mind, that's what we need, at least, is to say, no, stop telling me about the person you need. That's the job of the work design architect. You keep sending me these recs. What's going on? Why do you need 5 Hadoop people all of a sudden? What's the project you're trying to get done? Because there might be a smarter way of getting it done.
Yeah.
By the way, we might have some people inside an organization who have those skills that you might want to think about. You might have somebody that's got 80% that we might want to upskill to 20%. So the more you can talk about the work, the better. So the skill of a work design architect, in my mind, number one is the ability to deconstruct work. Number two, truly understanding the business objectives of that organization. So everything you're doing is tying to that. Is it making an impact? And the third one is storytelling through data. Because the way that you're going to change people's behaviors, the way you're going to change their mindset, has to be through empirical evidence of there's a better way of doing that. And that's the journey that we're on as Allegis. We want to be the organization, sounds a bit grandiose, the place to go if you want to understand the best way to get work done. Because we're so global and we've got massive staffing companies as well as MSP and RPO, we've got all that data that we sort of know if you've got a piece of work to do, where you should put it in the world and how much it should cost and how long it will take, right? So that's the journey that we're on. Wrong way to go, but the data is there. It's about having the ability, and I know you and I have talked before about the product we've created called DocuSift, which takes all the unstructured data and structures it to take the black art out of statements of work, so you can truly understand what you're getting. What does it take to get that work done? So, the point you're making earlier, which I agree with, as an organization, if you're paying somebody an outcome, you sort of don't need to see the sausage machine, you just need to see the sausage. For our industry, to be able to add true value, I think we need to see the machine. What ingredients we've got into that, because now we can start advising organizations. And then the other piece, the last piece now of the work design architect, which is, I guess, sort of been expedited with COVID, is the concept of borderless talent or talent anywhere.
Right.
So that individual needs to have that understanding of where to put it. should I be putting this in Buenos Aires, or should I put it in Chile? Should I put it in Singapore or Hong Kong? And why should I put it there? What's the rationale behind that? And that is always a quality, speed, and cost, scenario, right? How quick do you want to get this done? What's the most important thing, and so on. So I think that it's prediction I made in my book a year or so ago, but I think every organization of size will have an army of work design architects in the future. They might not call them that. HR might own it and call them HR business partners. It might be procurement, call them category managers. It might be, complete workforce business partners. But we're seeing some early days of it. There's a handful of our clients that are working that way now. We're starting to see functions that report directly into the CEO, not HR or procurement. It's a separate thing, and I think we'll see more and more of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost something you can see feeding directly into the CFO. Say, what's our overall, this is our budget for getting stuff done. What do we need to get done? What's the most effective way to do it? I think it's I think effectively COVID may well have brought your predictions forward by about 5+ years.
But the CFO thing's really interesting, Johnny, because I always say that to procurement when I get very friendly with them, and I can be a bit bullshit. But I would say, if I went to your CFO and said, all the real estate around the world, I want to take that and report into the CEO next week on all of our real estate. Is it leased, mortgage? Do we own it? What's the cost per square foot? What's the utilization, et cetera, et cetera. Within a week, they pull that together and give you a report. You'd hope, okay, fine. Let's have that same conversation with the head of procurement, the head of HR, and talk about people.
Different story.
How are you going to work on today? Yeah. So then, if you think of the concept of talent architecture, paint a picture of the world and show me who these people are, what's the contract we have with them, what's the tenure, what's the true skill set. It'd be impossible to do. We still have organizations that go out on LinkedIn to see who works for them, see what skill sets they've got.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about data earlier, and I think I totally agree with you on that. Couldn't agree more. I think if you look at services procurement specifically, I would say the dearth of data is more evident in services procurement than it is in, certainly any other area of the workforce currently. And once that data starts to expand, the value of it is going to be immense. But on the other side of it, you've got companies getting work done in different ways, and what the concept of what a company or a brand or an organization is fundamentally will change as part of that. So how do you think that changes what makes a company attractive to work for? But also that kind of taking a step back from that, if I'm working for a company that's outsourcing into another company, that changes the dynamic again. And it comes back to this trade craft and specific skills, who you are, what value you're adding. But for a company to be attractive, to get work done effectively, what do you think the markers will be, and have they changed?
Right, yeah, I think in a few years, and just a short few years, organizations that haven't automated the menial tasks will struggle to attract talent. I remember a really good friend of mine, Anita, that worked for me years and years ago as a recruiter, and in the interview, she said to me, "Do you guys have email?" I'm like, "No, that'll never take off." And she didn't want to come and work for us because we hadn't got email. It sounds crazy now, but for those Gen Y millennials listening to this, but now in a couple of years, that's going to be the question that somebody will ask you if they're going to come and work for you. What do I actually have to do? Is all of that automated? Do I have my own personal robot? Because if I don't want to be doing all that, jobs are robots. That's going to be a massive differentiator. The other one, which I think, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm fascinated to see how it plays out next year, is if you look at career sites, and there's a great platform here, like an aggregator called themuse.com. Don't know if you've heard of them. They're out in New York, and it's where if you want to be one of the cool kids, you advertise on Muse. If they've got that, they've built a good brand for themselves. And everything on Muse, the same as everything on most career sites, is pictures of the office. And everybody, since Google, leaked that picture from Zurich a million years ago, the Helskauder, right? Everybody wants to be Google-esque.
Yeah.
Hey, come on, work for us. We've got a cool place. Well, now everybody's working from home. So I sort of don't care what the office looks like. I don't care you've got a foosball machine, right? So what a company's going to do, Nick, I think 2021, organizations that are in the business of employer branding, which we happen to be as well, are going to have a great year. As organizations try to rethink their value. So that's going to be interesting. I think that the fundamental piece to all the middle of all of that is what I call personal ROI in my new world of work model, which is about not taking one size fits all.
Yeah.
I think everybody's attracted and engaged and retained by the same thing. You know, we've all seen the studies where money isn't the most important thing. It's about recognition.
Yeah.
It's about belonging. And also it's fundamentally about advancing. You know, I passionately believe that every Friday night, people want to be exhausted in a good way. That first pint or that first glass of wine tastes even better. And it's like, boy, I deserve that.
Yeah.
That's what you want because you've achieved things. Coming back to my projectization, far worse than that on a Friday night, you'd be, oh my God, I've worked 12 hours a day and I've got nothing done. What a disaster. Those are the companies you want to leave, right? So how do you set people up for success so that their value is increasing week by week, month by month, year by year? And that isn't just monetary value, it's just as a human being, feeling they've achieved things.
And do you think that kind of that supports the argument that organizations that are effective at projectizing work and working out really what needs to be done, what are our objectives, which kind of ties back to the great leadership stuff, which is all about where are we going? We're all in the boat together, where are we going? Maybe that lends itself to the growth and success of companies that are very effective at doing that. Ultimately, they have to be organized to do that. They need to know where they're going, and therefore they know what they need to get done, and they can recognize when stuff has been achieved. Maybe it lends itself towards organizations, again, focusing on that, not just for productivity and efficiency, but also being able to attract the best suppliers and the best talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, the big debate that all companies are, the conversation every company's having right now is, what is our strategy post-COVID? Do we mandate people coming back to the office? Do we suggest they do? Do we try and encourage them to? That in itself can be a value prop, depending on who the worker is, right? Some people want to come back. Some people say, no, thank you, I'll get more done at home. The concept of a rush hour is crazy. Why go in London, stand on the tube for an hour, right?
Yeah.
When you could be working. So there's all that's taking play. I think there's going to be a mad scramble about who are the organizations that are true talent magnets. But yeah, a big piece of it will be those organizations that understand how to projectize work, how to get work done far differently. And then what's key to that, of course, is the mindset of whoever's running the show. I talk about the concept, you need a Lord of the Rings group running the organization, not a CEO. It's got to be more than that now, because there's so many different elements.
You need the Fellowship of the Ring rather than the Dark Lord of Mordor in charge of everything.
Yeah, because some baby boomers, and I'm a baby boomer, so I guess I'd say some baby boomers find it hard to change.
Yeah.
And there's one thing for sure is that's what organizations have to do right now is change and trust people. Trust they're going to get the work done, even though you can't see them. You think differently about getting work done. You can automate things and so on.
And I think that also ties into the genuine value of diversity, in the sense that, if you've got diversity within your company, in all areas of diversity, you're going to get different opinions, different thought processes, different angles, different attitudes and different attributes.
Yep.
And there's real value in that in terms of making a business as successful as it can possibly be. Yep. So I think that's a really exciting, interesting.
Let me give you a real tactical example of that we've just witnessed ourselves here. So we won Facebook a few months ago, MSP globally, 55 countries. You can imagine the size of the Facebook deal, right? For all their non-employee labor. And in 20 weeks, we implemented the whole thing across 55 countries virtually.
Wow.
If somebody had come up with an idea a year ago to say, with this implementation, we're flying people all over the world. They're staying in hotels. A lot of these are mothers or fathers. We're taking them away from their families. Why don't we just do that virtually? You'd have been laughed at the boardroom. Crazy idea. The client will never go for it. The client loved it. I mean, and I don't want to speak for them, but they'll say great things. It was just a phenomenal success. We're not going to go back to the old way. That doesn't mean we won't do some face-to-face, but we're not going to have people being away from their loved ones for weeks on end when you don't need to. And it's interesting because when you're online, when you're virtual, we learn you can only have 3-hour sessions for these discovery intake sessions. We used to get people to sit in the room for 10 hours.
Well,
that's a great example of, we sort of kick ourselves. Why didn't we think of that? Well, it doesn't really matter. Move forward. What can we learn from that? And how can we make sure we don't go back to the old way?
Yeah, and one of the questions I was going to ask you was around how you saw these changes and the acceptance of outcome-based remote work increasing, how that was going to affect the way that work gets done globally. And from my own kind of vantage point, looking at it, I just see how it's just accelerated that acceptance and that openness. Are there any particular things you guys are seeing in terms of what or forecasting in terms of just the global nature of how work gets done?
Yeah, I think I guess everything that I've been saying is just to reiterate that, and at a macro level, is the growth of, as more and more people outsource work, we need more companies that are outsource providers to deliver that work, like service providers. So I think we're going to see an explosion of contractors getting together with a few of their buddies and call themselves an institution.
Yeah, totally agree.
For Simon. Right? That's what's going to happen. So you can have these mom and pop shops, as they're called in the US, 4 or 5 guys. Hey, we can actually, rather than just paying us on an hourly rate, give us that piece of work and we'll own it for you. I think there's going to be a massive explosion of those, which is, they're going to take on, they'll be taking on some of the big boys and girls, which usually has an impact of, a bit of a, price impact, make it more competitive. I think because of everything you were saying earlier about getting the data and analytics out of the statements of work, I think that's actually giving the little guy a bigger chance and bigger boost.
I agree, and ultimately, what's this kind of standard expectation? If you run a competitive bid in a services procurement, you'll save 20%. If you run a full procurement process, you could save up to 40%. Right. And I think a lot of the time at the moment, particularly with the big consultancies, the big suppliers, they're used by default. There isn't data used in the decisions, and there isn't really much evidence on what's being delivered and what's being done. So ultimately, I've heard some procurement experts kind of work with the mantra of always use the smallest supplier you can to get the work done. The innovation and the supplier diversity, I think, is going to massively increase. And what you're talking about are people kind of clubbing together to form small consultancies and service providers. Surely the co-employment laws that you've got in the US that are starting to get more scrutiny, the IR35 situation in the UK, certainly the stuff that's going on in places like Belgium, France, Netherlands, Germany, I think they're all going to drive similar situations. But in some ways it's great to see because people are adapting and they're finding the best ways to get things done. I think one of the things that always fascinates me around this whole conversation, you touched on it briefly earlier, is this idea of who owns it. You've got the HR stakeholders, you've got procurement stakeholders, you've got operations, you've got finance. When you look at statement of work and outcome-based work delivery, how do you see the roles of the different stakeholders in ultimately how the work gets done and how it's managed?
Yeah, and we're quite optimistic actually. What's happened in the last, I think it had already started, but there was also the COVID impact on it, is that back in the day, MSPs, it was always procurement, services always procurement. Then we started seeing HR coming in, and it got to about 50-50. So when we have like one of our big events for our clients, 50% will be HR, 50% procurement. What we're seeing now is actually having them both in the conversation, and that's very, very encouraging. And as I mentioned, there's a few companies that have created a workforce transformation group or something they'll call it. But we've been banging on about that. I did a piece of research with SIA. It's got to be 10 years ago about reaching across the chasm between HR and procurement. But we are definitely seeing true collaboration, not just talking about collaboration. We are seeing that now, and you've got an equal stake in the game. And they, procurement look at it from a procurement lens, and HR look at it from a talent lens. So that's encouraging. I hope that continues.
Yeah, like you say, I think it really takes collaboration. You can't just say one department can do everything, because it's too much. You look at the way that HR can add massive value by focusing on looking after people and upskilling people and retaining people, whereas procurement involved in a buying exercise, it's a different type of, needs different skills, different type of transaction. Yeah. And over the top of all of it, you've got the finance heads that are basically saying strategically, what is the most effective use of our resources? And I think that's the key question that companies need to be asking themselves from the CEO down. And that will become the most important question that they're asking themselves, certainly in the current climate that we're in.
And I think the other positive impact we've seen, slightly off topic, but just worth mentioning, is that we're getting stuff done quicker now than we've ever done before. Making decisions a lot quicker, because we've just got into that rhythm, and you just got to get on with stuff, right? You can't wait. The world's moving at such a rapid pace. And that's just about setting expectations. Something that would taken 6 months and a big work stream and a number of work streams of big groups. Let's just get that done in 3 weeks, right?
It's like the vaccines, and it's like just, in a crisis, you can't afford to procrastinate. And ultimately, it comes down to that whole thing of, if you've got something 85% as good as it can possibly be, but it's going to take you 10 times the amount of time to get it to 90%, 85% is where you should be. Kind of that kind of thinking around, being effective. So I think that, the vaccines are hopefully will turn out to be a great example of that, in the sense that vaccines normally take 10 years. Now, the side of that, which is kind of slightly different, is with a vaccine, normally you run it for a good few years to see if side effects happen multiple years later. But just using that as an example of just getting processes done, it's incredible the way that everybody's had to adapt to that. And like you say, companies, I've heard multiple stories about companies rolling out remote working strategies in 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever. Whereas if you'd asked them before and there was, everything's going to break, it's going to be impossible. For us, when the lockdown first happened in the UK and we started working from home, it didn't really change things at all for us, because we're all we're a software as a service business. Everything's cloud hosted. We're all tech savvy. We were doing Zoom calls all the time anyway, dealing with overseas customers, etc. So it wasn't really much of a transition for us. But I was really genuinely surprised at the amount of people that I knew that just didn't know their way around it, and it was a whole new thing. But it's just these crisis situation just increases the speed of adaptation. And in fact, I spoke to one of the senior guys at SIA during the lockdown around some of the stuff that we were doing, and their comment to me was, if you look at this kind of scenario, when this type of situation happens, a massive economic change, it drives technology transformation exponentially. And they were kind of talking about during the Great Recession, the 2008 credit crunch and the big recession afterwards, how that drove the adoption of the MSP VMS model exponentially, and talking about how this change is quite possibly going to drive a similar transition from a technical point of view in services procurement. So very interesting. Who knows what the next 5 years hold? Are there any sort of specific predictions you might have? I know we've touched on some of it, but kind of key things you think that the next 5 years will hold?
I think that there will be the haves and the have-nots. Unfortunately, I think social equality is obviously at the top of everybody's lips. I just hope that stays top of mind for everybody, because I think all of this, that's massive negativity that's happening right now. Putting that aside, I think there'll also be a have and have-nots within organizations. There'll be organizations that get it, they get on board, understand you can't go back, there's nothing to go back to, we've moved on from that, and truly understand the best way to get work done. They'll be the winners. And
last point before I let you go. So your book, it was originally published in, was it May 2019?
Yeah.
Something like that. So if you could redesigning the way work works, bearing in mind everything that's happened over the last 9-10 months, what would be the key things that you would change or add to the book, and what other things do you think are reflected in terms of your predictions?
Yeah, and I seriously think I wish I had time to rewrite it. I just don't. But or do an update to it. But I don't have time. Put a COVID stamp on the front might be good for sales, But I think that I underestimated the speed of change that we're actually capable of. Right. So I think I'd have been more gung-ho, more aggressive in the book about not just opinion, but more like, hey, you have to do this. Right? So I think because so many things have bore fruit this last year. So yeah, that'd be the biggest thing. I'd have been a bit more on my soapbox.
Well, what is it? I remember Boserup, the Danish philosopher, saying need is the mother of invention. Ultimately, if you had been more gung-ho at the time, maybe people wouldn't have believed you. People wouldn't have accepted it.
That's true.
And I think it's probably changed the mindset for everybody, just in terms of how people's lives have changed and we've adapted. But yeah, listen, it's been so interesting to chat to you, Bruce. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much for your time. Some super exciting things on the horizon, and hopefully a nice Christmas for you and your family and everybody, and hopefully a positive and exciting 2021.
Great, and the same to you, Johnny. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Great conversation. Merry Christmas.
Stuff. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Yes.